One. Hey gang, and welcome back to Reality's Edge and Alien Protocols. I'm Buddy, and it's such a pleasure to have someone I'm sure you will recognize just from the image. All of our viewers should know this gentleman very well. He is a laser physicist and a pioneer at SRI in the remote viewing research that was done there, the groundbreaking research into ESP. He is the author of The Reality of ESP, Limitless Mind, Mind Reach, Radiant Minds, The End of Suffering, and the incredible new movie out now, Third Eye Spies, Russell Targ. It's such a pleasure and an honor to have your time today.
Very happy to be with you. Thank you.
This movie is groundbreaking. Our viewers are very familiar with your work and very familiar with remote viewing, but you were able to do some astonishing things for this movie. Could you tell us about this process?
Well, the most astonishing thing we did in the film is get the CIA's permission to make it. And we have, the movie is really an event because we have on camera our two CIA contract monitors, senior scientists now retired from the CIA. So we have a distinguished physician, Kit Green, and a research physicist, Ken Kress, and they are on camera just as you are, looking at the audience saying, we were polygraphed, we were there, what Targ said really happened, and we saw it happen. So that's really the peg for our film. I've made films where I'm standing up saying, I was in the lab and I did this, but who would believe me? But if you got the CIA, and we opened the film with Jimmy Carter saying we were looking for a downed Russian airplane in Africa and we couldn't find it because it had crashed in the jungle. So we called one of our CIA assets in California with a psychic woman, and she got a map of North Africa and put a little circle on the country of Zaire. We sent in a helicopter, and where the helicopter landed, natives were already pulling the airplane out of the river.
Amazing, amazing.
The most remarkable thing that happened in my presidency, said Jimmy Carter.
Wow.
My feeling is, if you can't believe Jimmy Carter, who would you believe?
And that is such a huge incident. I mean, the statistical odds of that any other way are just beyond, calculation almost. It's really...
That's right. The CIA had been looking for this for 2 weeks and could not see it with satellite photography because it was in the impenetrable jungle.
And of course, this wasn't the only statistical fluke you guys had. I mean, time and time again, I mean, from incredible drawings of Pat Price to the incredibly detailed schematics of Joe McMoneagle, the stuff that you guys proved is way beyond any statistical model. I mean, there's been analysis of your guys' work and, a little bit of controversy, but I think it's pretty indisputable when you look at the scope of the evidence and all the multiple studies that have been done about this. Do you think
what we did was really not, the work we did was operational for the CIA, it was not statistical.
Yeah.
The CIA would not have supported us for 2 decades at $1 million a year if we were doing statistics. We were finding hostages, Russian submarine, our ambassador to Iran, when he was a hostage. We did all sorts of remarkable thing. We even were in on the Patty Hearst case.
It's amazing how you were used by multiple agencies too, not just the CIA, and you were used repeat times by multiple different agencies.
Yeah, we were supported by all the intelligence agency. We were run by Dale Graff, who an early program we had was from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Dale Graff knew about our work in remote viewing. He then moved up to the Defense Intelligence Agency, where he directed all the different intelligence agencies using our facilities.
Wow. It's pretty stunning how much faith the government, who's, this is the government, so they're going to be reanalyzing and auditing you guys constantly. And of course, we've heard the wonderful stories of the auditors coming in and you guys making the auditors remote view and them having that incredible first-timers success that we're familiar with. Who thought of that first, getting the auditors to do the remote viewing?
Well, I was always the inside person. In the work we did initially, there was a kind of psychic hide and go seek, which is what Ingo Swann taught us to do. Swann was a lifetime psychic, and he came to our program, and we had him. My colleague Hal Puthoff and I are both laser physicists, so we had him doing little laser thing, like the laser in the box, is it turned on or turned off? Can you tell me about the picture in the next room? He says, if I want to see the picture in the next room, I'll open the door. My ability is I can focus my attention anywhere on the planet or off the planet. If you don't give me something more interesting to do, I'm going to go home. I said, well, what do you want to do? He said, well, send Hal. I don't drive. You can probably catch on. My vision's not very good.
Mm-hmm.
So send Hal to drive some random place in the Bay Area, and I will tell you where he is. And we did that on a random protocol, which is to say we had 60 possible targets that I didn't know anything about. So I would sit with Ingo or with Pat Price or with you or whoever came to the laboratory, and I said, Hal has gone somewhere. I have no idea where he could be. And the magic words that run this whole program are quiet your mind and tell me about the surprising images that show up in your awareness.
Yes.
Tell me what you're experiencing.
Yes.
And that works with visiting psychics and the Undersecretary of Defense and visiting CIA contract monitors. What does not work is tell me where they went.
Yes.
And this was understood since the time of Padmasambhava, who's over my shoulder here on the door. He wrote a book called Self-Liberation Through Seeing with Naked Awareness.
Yes, 2000 years old.
8th century Buddhist Dharma master. And he wrote a book called Self-Liberation Through Seeing with Naked Awareness. And he says, your nature is timeless awareness. That's who you are. And if you want to experience that, you have to give up your desire to name and to grab and to guess answers. Just experience what shows up in your awareness. So this was all understood in the 8th century. And I mentioned that, so this is not New Age.
No.
This has been going on since the time of Patanjali, 400 years before Christ.
And, you know, we talk about this on our channel and we cite that example, and a great quote that we love and repeat here many times is, if you still your mind like the surface of a lake, you can reflect the universe.
That's right. That's a line from Patanjali. And,
you know, it's pretty amazing how in life, oftentimes as humans, we're so desperate to go seeking the answers and to fritter and to toil and to go searching all these different places. But the irony is, if you, instead of go racing out looking for answers, if you just still yourself and forget about all those senses and let them all go, that first gestalt, that first thing that, the information will come to you. And it's this is such stunning, groundbreaking information. And your research has really highlighted the reality of it. This is groundbreaking stuff. The implications are huge. This is mind over matter stuff. How do you think ESP, I know this is a little complicated, how do you think ESP relates to psychokinesis?
Well, I don't think ESP is really related to psychokinesis. In ESP, you're inflowing the nature of the world. As the Buddha said, there's no separation in consciousness. So it's as though whatever you want to experience is already in your awareness. Psychokinesis is doing stuff. I'm interested in making a psychic garage door opener, but that would not be remote viewing. In my book, In Reality of ESP, I describe how I work with a visitor to help facilitate his remote viewing. And that's what you could do with a friend. That I describe. I don't tell you how to find a friend. You have to do that by yourself. But if you can find a friend, you and that person can share little objects, where she'll come to your house with an object in a bag and say, I have something interesting here. Can you describe what it feels like? What are you going to see when you open the bag? What's surprising here? And you can learn the parts of your psychic perception that are correct and what you're making up. So as an engineer, I would say you're learning to separate the psychic signal from the mental noise.
Yes.
So people say, well, you worked with the great Joe McMoneagle. Did you teach it? Were you the one who taught him how to do remote viewing? And I don't teach anybody how to remote viewing. It's a natural ability. It's like saying, who taught you to open your eyes?
But there is a gift to being a good monitor, though, not leading too much and allowing them to explore their own senses. What are the keys to being a good monitor?
To listen to what the person is saying and not try and lead them. Since in all remote viewing situations that I was ever involved in, I didn't know anything. I was blind in a literal sense, that I had no idea what the target was, where they were, who the person was. That means that I can say anything that I want to that would be helpful. So if I'm interviewing somebody and I say, okay, where is Elizabeth hiding now? What are you experiencing? And he says, well, it looks like Macy's. I will just stop the show and say, well, don't tell me about Macy's. I know that sounds rude, because I don't want you to try and name the place, since in my experience, that's impossible. It doesn't sound, you see, I don't know what the answer is, but I know what remote viewing sounds like. So for example, if I have a book here, I say, I have this French book here, could you read some paragraphs from the Psychically? And he starts saying things in German. Now, I don't know what the answer is, but I can tell the difference between French and German. So if the guy says, let me tell you what I'm seeing, and it comes out German, I'll say, you're looking at the wrong place. I don't know the answer, but that ain't it.
You know, with the Macy's example, that was with Jeffrey Mishlove, and you had, I think, stopped him and said, no, describe what you're feeling. And he drew the drawings, I think, and it was this incredible drawing of this archway that they were at. Is that correct? Am I remembering correctly?
Right. Jeffrey was a good friend. He was getting his PhD in parapsychology from Berkeley, and he wanted to see what we were doing. And he's the one who sat down with me and said, I think she's at Macy's. And I said, well, let's start over. I want to know what you're experiencing. And he then drew this array of coat hangers, which is why he was thinking of Macy's, but it was a pedestrian overpass made of interlocking bits of wire off into the distance. His drawing was superb. And
it's really amazing.
Yeah.
I've seen that. It's really
the guidance that I can offer is I can direct him to say things. I don't know the answer, but I can direct him to say things that sound like remote viewing rather than sound like guessing.
That it's amazing. You know, it's that these little subtle cues, if you prompt your mind for the subtle cues that come to it from the subconscious and not from that left brain, I guess monitoring is really the art of, separating the two sides of the brain and not forcing anything on the viewer, and actually kind of trying to be, I guess, a prompt for the real subconscious.
That's right. One of the episodes in the film, a naval officer comes to us at SRI and says, I have a picture of a man in this envelope. What can you tell me about him? So I go to our little shielded room and I tell the psychic, we've got a photograph of a man here. I don't know anything about him. I just know it's a picture of a man in the envelope. Can you tell me what you feel about this? I'm not going to say, who is it, for example? That would be a bad question. And I say, what are your feelings about the guy in the envelope? And the psychic said, this man is really sick. He can hardly walk. He's very weak. He's in the dark, very sick. But I feel him coming out of the darkness into the light. I see him getting on an airplane. That's what I get. So it's a 10-minute interview. Very sick man in the dark, but he's getting on an airplane. And it turned out that's just what my Navy officer wanted to know, because the man was Richard Queen, the ambassador to Iran, and he was one of the hostages.
Wow.
And they wanted to know, is he going to be released? Because he had multiple sclerosis and was getting sicker and sicker. And the Iranians did not want him to die under their custody. That would make a problem that's different than what they wanted, their problem.
Yeah, it's a big diplomatic difference.
They're going to release him, and he did 2 days later, he went flying off to Germany and lived for a number of years subsequently.
Wow.
So my feeling is, my general idea about remote viewing is that a experienced remote viewer or a remote viewer with an experienced interviewer can answer any question that has an answer.
Wow, that's amazing. At any time, any place, in the past, in the future, any time. You oftentimes wonder with these gifts and these abilities, and even psychokinesis. What is the limit? Where is the boundaries? Is it about moving quantum probabilities, and therefore the larger the object, the more energy required, the more difficult it is? Or does this have nothing to do with that? Is this a kind of phenomena that you believe can ever be quantified scientifically?
Well, the most successful data has been moving very small things like electrons. In Bob John at Princeton has done a lot of experiments where people try and change the output of a random number generator.
Correct. Yeah.
Now, in that kind of experiment, you have to do millions of trials. Now, millions of trials go by pretty quickly, but you do have to do millions of trials, and their work is significant. Can you close your eyes and alter the output of the random number generator? And the answer is yes, you can, but not very much. So the psychokinesis, we measure the success of these experiments with something called effect size.
Mm-hmm.
You can make, if you have a tiny amount of ESP, you can make it highly significant by doing millions of trials. And that's what they did at Duke University.
And they've done this time and time again at different places. Pear did their studies. They've done the Global Consciousness Project. A lot of people have used random number generators, and it seems pretty, empirical at this point that the mind can affect random number generators.
You can do it, but weakly. The effect size for remote viewing is about 50 times greater than the effect size for random number generators. That is to say, if you want to do a psychokinesis experiment, you're going to have to do 50 more trials than I have to do with the remote viewing. When I first presented this material, the Psychic Hide and Go Seek, I presented that to the Parapsychological Association in 1975 to a conference in Santa Barbara. And we would do 9 trials with Pat Price. He would get 7 out of 9 first place matches at odds 100,000 to 1.
Wow.
We did an experiment with Hella Hammond, who was our control person.
Yes, that's a funny story.
And she was even more significant than Price. We did 9 trials with Hella, and the odds are 1,000,000 to 1. And the parapsychologists thought we were lying. First of all, what do you physicists know about how to do an experiment? And how are you able to get hugely significant outcomes from a handful of trials? We would have to do hundreds of trials to get that kind of statistical significance. And the answer is very simple. We were asking people to do a task that they actually are able to do.
Yeah.
The guessing playing cards is a very, very hard task.
Yes.
Because the noise it's all about signal to noise ratio. We don't know how to increase the psychic signal, but we're very skillful at how to reduce the mental noise. And if I ask you to describe, if I tell you I got a playing card here, what do I have? Now, you know all those cards perfectly. They've been burned into your memory for a lifetime. And you mentally cycle through the diamonds and clubs and the hearts of spades, and that's all noise. Whereas, and that's noise from memory and imagination.
Yes.
Whereas if I tell you my partner is hiding someplace in the Bay Area, could be anywhere, just tell me about the images that show up. You say, okay, I surrender. This is not a guessing game. I got to actually quiet my mind and look for images that come in. And that's the whole difference. The card guessing was something that J.B. Ryan did at Duke because it's easier to quantify. If you get 12 cards out of 24. That's a hot result, significant at 2 standard deviations, no doubt about it.
And you
But
guys,
you don't see that very often, because let me tell you about the paradox.
Hmm.
It's easier to describe if I tell you my friend is hiding someplace on the planet and I have no idea where he is. Nowhere, it could be anywhere on the planet. So it's easier to find my buddy at one out of an infinitude of places than it is to guess 1 in 5 cards.
because the signal to noise ratio, yeah.
That's
You know,
if I tell you he's anywhere in the world, you surrender. So you're going to have to give up guessing, because guessing obviously not going to work.
and a lot less noise there.
And that's really that's the secret of our success. The secret of our success is we were doing a task that actually corresponds to what people are able to do. And we were sent there by the great psychic Ingo Swann. That is our change in protocol is it's as though for the first time the researchers actually listened to what the psychic had to say.
And that's so amazing too, how he sought you guys out. His confidence was so high. And of course there's the sheep, goat whole premise and all that stuff. But the fascinating thing to me about Ingo especially was that he also demonstrated time and time again under laboratory conditions psychokinesis. He made things appear on infrared film. He did those experiments at CUNY with the water and mist. I think it was like entropy experiments. He's done experiment after experiment in the famous quark detector with Hal, where he was able to get through all that shielding and not only see the shape of it, through his remote viewing, but also make the connection to see it, but also made the connection to affect it. And, it's just, this is such.
We show that whole experiment in the film. We show them going into Princeton with the big superconducting bank vault and the machine running along smoothly, making sine waves. And then Ingo focuses attention on it. We were excited that he could describe the machine. The CIA was impressed that he could affect the output, because this thing was supposed to be shielded, and he was able to change the output of the device.
It's the implications of being able to push matter with the mind, even if at a small statistical level, a small statistical chance, maybe some people have a greater gift than others. The implications of that, the implications of remote viewing, being able to see anytime, any place, are kind of wonderful for the average person. It puts the power in the people's hands. Transparency is a wonderful thing when light comes to shine into different issues, I had a couple questions from some of our audience.
The Ingo was able to do something like that in our laboratory, where we had a visitor from NASA. NASA was supporting our work at one point. I had built an ESP teaching machine, which you may know about.
Yes, we have the app.
That we could teach astronauts to get in touch with their spacecraft. And when I showed this to a conference with Werner von Braun did exceptionally well with my ESP game. He turned to the administrator, NASA's administrator, James Fletcher, and said, "Why don't you give these guys some money?" So all I needed was a word from von Braun and a little help from Edgar Mitchell. And we got to do research showing people could improve their psychic abilities with feedback and reinforcement. And I now have that game available as a free application from the iTunes store. It's called ESP Trainer, and you can have that on your cell phone.
We constantly push our viewers to get that app, to download it from the iTunes store. It's on all Apple products, and it's the only one that works on sensory reinforcement out there. There's other ESP games, but like you were saying before, they're guessing games. You're not going to learn. You're not going to have the sensory reinforcement. It gives you the colors, the sounds, vibrations. It's ingenious, and we use it all the time. And
what we invented was the pass button. It's the idea that you can teach with feedback and reinforcement, but you don't want to make the person guess a color if they don't have a feeling. So if you don't have that feeling you develop, you can just press the pass button, and the machine will show you what the color had been and not charge you for the trial. So the goal is to get the most possible out of 24, but we don't make you guess if you don't have that feeling. So people are able to run up their scores. As they learn what it feels like to be psychic, they will sit with their eyes shut and say, nothing's coming through, I'll pass, I'll pass, I'll pass. There looks yellow, and they'll choose the yellow. So it's really an opportunity with feedback and reinforcement to learn what it feels like to have a psychic impression.
It's really a wonderful game for so many different reasons. We've talked about it, had several episodes about just the game itself, and there's little phenomena that happens. Sometimes you'll notice that you always pick the second one ahead. And if you know that's your tendency to pick one ahead, you can adjust yourself. Or just even little things like if you pick faster than normal, just as not as a general principle, but just faster than normal every once in a while, you'll see that you go more subconscious by going fast, and that your numbers can go up because you're tapping into a more subconscious area. But we love this game, and we're very thankful that you made this, and we consider it like an important part of your daily psychic training abilities, your psychic exercises. So
I'd be interested to know, I made that game in 1965, so that game is more than 50 years old, and it's like an author always likes to see his book stays in print. So this game is still, the reason I wanted to give it away is so that it stays in print and people will use it. And also, a good Buddhist does not charge for the Dharma. If I find a way to help people get in touch with their true nature, I'm not going to charge you for that.
You know, speaking of Buddhism, we're going to circle back to that in a minute because that's a really important part, I think, of this discussion. I'd love to get into in a moment. But I got a couple questions from some of our viewers. And Dr. Simeon Hine, who also does a Reality's Edge show with me, had an incredible question. He says that Ed May was talking about teaching a computer chip how to do remote viewing, and that he went to Russia to work on this. Do you think this is possible to teach a computer chip, a computer, how to do remote viewing?
Well, that's what the guy who invented the computer, the famous Englishman, Turing, said the way you can tell whether something is intelligent or not in the end is whether it can read your mind. The machine can't read your mind. Now, I think that you can learn to affect a machine, but I don't think the machine can know what you're thinking.
Ultimately itself, yeah.
Because that means you have an output from you to the machine, and I have no reason. Well, the machine certainly doesn't have consciousness. Doesn't have awareness. So I don't know what he's talking about with regard to a machine being able to do remote viewing or just respond.
Yeah, it's a very complex question.
Now, in the sense of the thing that we were talking with initially, we construe Bob John's experiment where he had people try and affect the output of a machine. And that worked somewhat. You have to do it's a weak effect, but it was real. Now, the way Bob John construes that as the person is pushing the machine. She's able to use her ability to get more ones and zeros. Very easy to calculate that. You might say that the machine was reading her mind, and that she wasn't actually pushing the machine, but rather the machine was able to know what she's thinking and would give that output. So, and there's probably no way to differentiate that.
Do you think an increased genetic ability, like Ingo Swann demonstrated, an increased ability seemed to be more than the average person? Do you think it can be inherited, an increased psychic ability, or?
Yeah, I think psychic abilities are inherited, like intelligence is inherited. That is the caveman who knew a bear was coming into his cave. His family is going to survive better than the one who couldn't do that.
You know, it's funny. I've heard that same kind of notion, and I've kind of thought myself that it might be the female. I oftentimes hear from psychics that they got it from their mom. Their mother was the psychic one. And I oftentimes think, in the caveman era, when the men were out hunting, the women had to keep their family and the genetic pool alive by strictly intuition, whether the bear was coming or another tribe was coming, and maybe intuition.
Well, in the Bach family, all the men were great musicians, and in the Mozart family, you had a number of talented musicians. In the Mendelssohn family, you had a couple of very smart lawyers on either side of the musician. So I think that intelligence is definitely, I mean, in
A factor.
the Darwin family, you have a whole bunch of smart people. So I think intelligence is inherited. The evidence is very strong for that. And I would conjecture we don't have enough data on ESP. Certainly in England, there are many families where grandma was psychic and all the women in the family were psychic, as you say. The people are psychic who have permission to be psychic.
Yeah, that sheep and goat.
If we're in a society where you're killing the witches, you don't have a lot of people standing up and saying, I'm having these experiences. For example, Ingo was in our laboratory once when a NASA administrator came by. George Pezdertz was the administrator for new projects at NASA, our great benefactor. And he came by and said, you know, we're launching a spacecraft for Jupiter shortly. Is there anything you can tell us about Jupiter that we're going to find out that we haven't seen before? And Ingo took a puff of his cigar and leaned back. Well, it's interesting. I see a big ring of ice crystals around Jupiter. There's a big fat ring of ice crystals around Jupiter.
Amazing.
Said, well, you're thinking of Saturn. And Ingo was not amused easily. He said, for Christ's sake, I know the difference between Saturn and Jupiter. This is Jupiter. And you'll see when your spacecraft gets there, you're going to find ice crystals in a big circle. I know that no one's ever seen that, but that's it. And
Amazing.
18 months later, they came back with photographs of the ice circle. We show those in our film, and I discussed that whole episode in The Reality of ESP.
And that's the longest confirmed. Yeah, that's the longest confirmed remote viewing. The rings.
Right, that shows that you can look 500 million miles away in real time.
It's just such a wonderful notion for people to realize the power of their mind that they've been sitting on this entire time. They didn't realize the power of their mind. Instead of being all busy and their senses going crazy, that they can still their mind and have these incredible experiences. Is that what drew you naturally to Buddhism? That natural philosophy that connected the two?
That's an interesting question. I was sitting in with the answer is probably yes. I hadn't thought about it that way. I was taken to the Theosophical Society. I was a young graduate student at Columbia. I was 20 years old, graduate student in physics. And I had a friend, the draftsman in our department, the older woman, enthusiastic theosophist. And she would take me to meetings of this society, Metaphysical Society, in New York City.
Yes, the Upper East Side. I've been to it.
That's right. And I like them. I like Dora Kunz, who was running it, and there's some physicists. And they were very sympathetic to their doctrine, secret doctrine from Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. She was a psychic, claimed to be a great psychic. And of course, in the secret doctrine and in their teachings of meditation invite you to have psychic experiences. Mm-hmm. So I would say that the answer to your question is yes. I hadn't thought about. I found theosophy very intelligent and appealing because the first time I'd found somebody outside of a university who was interested in psychic abilities.
Wow, that's fascinating. And it just is such a natural connection, all of them, to theosophy, and then from theosophy to Buddhism. Now, how did you get from Buddhism to Gangaji? Gangaji is such a great voice of reason in Buddhism, and we've talked about her on our channel, and I've watched so much of her stuff, and she really is inspiring. How did you find Gangaji?
Well, she was teaching. I live in Palo Alto, and she was teaching nearby, and one of her devotees told me about her, and I was sold. I thought it was self-evident that she's doing what she says she's doing. That she invites you to quiet your mind in meditation. And I just had an overwhelming connection with her. So it's obvious that she's residing in a loving state, which is unique to her. There's many people come to her for the first time and don't know what a Gangaji would be. They have a powerful psychic connection with her.
And it's
she doesn't own that. She said that's all you. You're just I'm here to be helpful. She would never say that I'm projecting anything, but I think that she would certainly agree that you can, since there's no separation, she would agree that you're able to resonate and experience her. And that's why she has everyone, before she says a word, everyone sits down for a half hour and just meditates in silence with her. And many people have transcendent experiences before she says a word.
You know, she's really amazing too. From the many videos that I've watched, she kind of embodies so much of the Buddhist principle about the ending of suffering. She helps people end their suffering time and time again. People who are in mourning, people who are physically ill, people who are going through adversity. She is kind of a wonderful guide in terms of that end of suffering. And that's interesting how
her goal is to help you discover who you are. This her teacher, Raman Maharshi, was self-awakened as a teenager in India. And he taught in silence for almost a decade. That is, his devotees made an ashram for him at Arunachala, which is a mountain in southern India. And people from all over the world, educated people, writers and philosophers from England would come in and just sit with him and would soak up the vibe and
the silence.
Away better, quieter, happier people. And he didn't, it was not necessary. He didn't start talking until a decade after he had been already recognized as an enlightened being.
That is such a great story. I'd never heard of that. That is such a wonderful story. You know, it reminds me of the Buddhists who didn't want to cause any harm at all, so much so that they would stop walking because they didn't want to harm any microscopic being. You know, there's so many wonderful stories.
The Jains are like that. They have to have somebody walking in front of them and sweeping away any ants. The Jains in India makes it tough to get around in India.
There's someone that we're really fascinated with on our channel, and we've talked about numerous times, and you've had personal exposure with that person, and that is the infamous Ted Owens. What is your recollections of Ted Owens, and what were any personal experiences jump out about Ted?
Well, I haven't had, you know, I was ridging for men because there's another, ARG Owens is a Canadian psychic researcher who is not Ted Owens. Ted Owens is the PK man.
Correct. The PK man with the mantis beings, Twitter and Tweeter, and calling the lightning bolt on command, and some of those.
He was a friend of Jeffrey Mishlove, but Ted Owens was sort of publicity seeking and eager to work with us at SRI at a time when we had a top secret program. So we did occasionally have people come work with us. We had Charlie Tart and other Edgar Michon, Dean Radin work with us. But these are all people who could get a secret clearance or top secret clearance. Ted Owens was interested in promoting his own psychic prowess. And that just seemed not consistent with what we were doing.
Sure, yeah, and you guys were doing more reading, and he was doing more PK and very self-indulgent and gambling and drinking and all sorts of stuff.
That's right. So he proposed to us. He said, "I'm going to send you. You guys are ignoring me. I'm going to send you a huge storm this weekend." So this is Northern California, and such a thing as possible. And he sent us that. Sent us a fax. I have memory of reading a telegram, but it must have been a fax that he sent us.
Yeah,
in 1975 or so.
Yeah, he was infamous for faxing.
Weekend, Palo Alto had one of the very, very unusual snowstorms to hit our area. It
Wow.
does snow here, but I can remember maybe that and one other. And I wrote to him. I said, "That's really remarkable. You forecasted that storm exactly. We had never had such a thing." And he was furious with me. He said, "I didn't forecast that storm. I created that storm."
Yes, I love that. It's so neat, so fascinating, and just he's such an incredible guy. There's so many incredible people from that era too, like Pat Price. Pat Price was such an amazing guy. He had such a mysterious passing, even being bumped into by somebody at the casino on his way into that casino. And there's a lot of mystery surrounding his passing. Some people say that he passed away in many ways that were similar to that ricin poisoning from the famous Russian umbrella case. Someone thought he died the same way. Do you think Pat Price and a really good psychics, it's dangerous for them? Frankly, do you think that's the case?
In our film, we're very fortunate. We have hours of interview with Kit Green and Ken Kress talking about their experiences with Pat Price.
Hmm.
And it's clear that Price died under mysterious circumstances. You see, Price worked with me to describe a Russian weapons factory. We were given the coordinates from the weapons factory.
Yes, and the
And
crane.
Price said, "I see this giant crane," and he drew the crane, and it was very much like the hidden crane. There was an airplane passing by, and I couldn't tell whether it was my airplane or your airplane.
No, that case is so famous, and we've in fact reviewed the pictures of the drawings and the spear they did afterward, and how incredibly accurate it was. And that was a secret Russian program. It's conceivable the Russians found out that he was finding out about them. And
It was so secret and so successful that the CIA then took Price from his comfortable situation at SRI in California and
wow,
brought him to Virginia to become a operative, a cooperating person working with the CIA, a CIA contractor.
wow.
He worked for them for about 6 months, and then he died.
Yeah, oh, I see your cat in the background. That's so great. That says wonderful things about you. Anyone who likes a cat is has very high credentials in my book, right there.
Yeah. This is big Zeno just walked in.
That's his name, Zeno?
Yes.
If
We called him something else when we first got him, but he seemed so intelligent that we renamed him after the famous Greek mathematician.
Of course, he's crawling up the stairs behind you in the background just to try and upstage you a little bit. Zeno. Well, I just have one more question for you. If you had any advice for young remote viewers, starting people who want to explore this topic, what would you say to them? What advice would you give them?
Familiarize yourself with what's been done. That is, don't try and invent how this all works. There are other things to read besides what I've written. I've written a number of books. Reality of ESP is my last book, and I tried very hard to give people information about the range of tasks that you can do psychically. Spy on the Russians, diagnose illness, heal people, look into the distance, look into the future. And then I have a couple of chapters on how you can work with another person, quieting your mind and learning to separate the psychic signal from the mental noise. To be able to look for the kinds of signals you can count on, the shape and I'm very good at describing color. That if I'm trying to guess something and I see some unique color, I can be pretty sure that I've done that correctly.
A lot of people have speculated that you were actually the great remote viewer. And I know you did that great viewing of the one time you were forced to, I guess, when Pat Price didn't show up, and you did this wonderful drawing of, I guess, where Kit Green was, or someone was, Hal maybe, of a airport.
I was in South America.
And he was on an airport on the beach, is that correct?
Price didn't show up for an experiment, so I had to do it. So I described it as airport on an island airport.
Well, thank you so much.
I mean, the good news is that remote viewing is so easy that even a scientist can do it.
You know, Mike, you have a great sense of humor. You know, that great story about you with the laser, and you know, they had the skeptical, I guess, auditors there, and they said, oh, you couldn't blast through a brick or something like that, and you had a really funny line. What was that line that you were going to hit them with?
Oh, well, they couldn't, but I had made a very, very powerful laser when I was working at Sylvania with a 1,000-watt laser in a much smaller package than anyone. Usually this thing would be 1,000 feet long, and this mine was in something the size of a filing cabinet. And
Mm.
they couldn't, the guy said, I could see the meter, it says 1,000 watts, but how do I know that? And what I did, I burned a hole through a fire brick and gave them this red hot fire brick to hold in their hand with a glowing hole. And I said, do you want chips with that?
That's great.
And they supported our program because they had convinced. I gave him the brick to take away with him. That's like giving people the experience of doing something psychic.
Because it's impossible to literally do what you did to burn a hole through a brick like that, correct?
That's right. So in my book, and the reality of ESP, and also our film, Third Eye Spies, you get to see a lot of psychic functioning going on. You get an idea that pretty normal looking people are able to incorporate psychic abilities into their lives because it's a normal ability. And they can learn to quiet their mind, see into the distance, see into the future, and Patanjali described just how to do that 400 years before Christ. In the Sutras of Patanjali, he totally understood on your way toward experiencing the divine, you will experience these divine experience, these psychic experiences.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Targ, first for showing us all more about ourselves, guiding us for these, you know, decades and teaching us, and, you know, your vigilance getting this information out against a sea of detractors from scientists to, you know, the fight that you fought to get this information out has not been easy. And this film is really a pinnacle of that. And I, you know, can't suggest highly enough people to go see this film, you know, Third Eye Spies, and to get to know more of your work.
It'll be out, the Third Eye Spies will be out the end of next month, end of February.
And they should buy it too. This is the kind of film you want to buy, you want to own, you want to be able to see these legends, you want to own this, and you want to have the behind the scenes info that I'm sure you get on the home copy. So
I think I agree.
Thank you so much, Dr. Targ. It's such a pleasure. We really appreciate your time. Thank you for
very much for
everything.
the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.